Hey everybody. Camilla is here and I get to chat with Camilla about her new book, and she's going to be with doing a workshop on the Gaian Conference, which is coming up January 20th. So Camilla is a dear friend. And I'm just going to read her bio here. Camilla Blossom is land alchemist, soul midwife, vibrational energy healer, light worker, and pioneering flower essence alchemist. She loves to mentor souls who wish to deepen their relationships with Gaia and the fairies, elementals, and spirits of land. She enjoys holding sacred space as soul midwife for spiritual rebirth of people, nature elementals, landscapes, waterways, and Gaia. This is good. Her teachings, books, and oracle decks cover flower essences, mermaids, land alchemy, and co-creating a new earth consciousness with the sacred spirits of Gaia. So she's covering a lot here. And she just published her book here, Sacred Spirits of Gaia, that I'm really excited about. So my name is Gaian Kinsey. I'm one of the organizers for the Fairy and Human Relations Congress, which is a gathering devoted to how do we work with the spirits of nature. So how do we work with weather spirits and plant spirits? And Camilla has really summed it up in her book, where she covers Sasquatch and dragons and the elementals and the plants, and a lot more. So a funny thing happened to me. I hurt my leg. I had to have a foot surgery. I'm on the couch. I'm dealing with like pain management. I have to manage pain for the first time in my life. And I'm surrounded by books. So I go up to my my visionary, plant person upstairs, and I ransack their bookshelves, and I go to my herbalist next door and I ransack so I've got a big pile of books, dealing with, shamanism and geomancy and a lot like witchcraft and just piles of books. And Camilla, I had your book and I read it in one swoop. And what you're doing, her book is, I have to say, with all the books that I had I have this stack of books, you're bringing something really original here that is, I think, groundbreaking, because you're talking about working with a land council. And normally when people talk about working with land, you're talking about geomancy, you're talking about land clearing, depossessing ghosts, spirits that have stuck to the land, working with ancestral land spirits that have gotten stuck, that you need to do forgiveness work. You've got weird structures with the land, but I've never heard anybody talk about land council. For me, it kind of reminds me of, remember Lord of the Rings? We had the Fellowship of the Rings. And I remember that was such a like, oh yeah, we need to do this in community. We need to have a hobbit and a dwarf and an elf and a wizard and the humans. And then the dwarf and the elves aren't really getting along. So we have to do some diplomacy there. But you're the first one who has talked about land council. So I just want to thank you, first of all, because that is something that that's new. That's a new archetype or a new thought. And I think this is important. You're bringing this forward. So how did the land council come about?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the land council.
Yeah.
This is really exciting.
And I guess just to add to some things you shared beautifully, the
Sorry about that.
all the work that I do, land alchemy, really does involve all those things you shared too. So just to know, like, you know, when I work with these land councils, we are clearing ghosts and energies and all sorts of things. So that is part of it. But the way I'm such a relationship person, and when I think I've shared this with you before, Jan, like my motto, and I pretty much with everyone that sees my work, that we are not here to heal Mother Earth, we're here to heal our relationship with her. And so that motto, just since I heard that from the land, from the fairies and nature spirits many years ago, it like became such an important motto. And realizing, yeah, everything's about relationship. And so this whole idea of like, well, how do we work with the land? How do we clear the land? How do we create relationship with Mother Earth, with Gaia? And to me, all these spirits, you know, in the animist tradition are of Gaia, right? The elementals and dragon guardians are like guardians of the mother, of the earth, the trees. Like, I feel like even humans, we are an extension of the earth. And so when we see things in the oneness, like it's really a relationship with all these. So the whole idea of the land council came through when I was working with Marshall, Golden Eagle, Jack. We were traveling and working, doing ancestor healing with people, going to communities, working with the water, water wheel, medicine wheel altars, to open more to the healing for water. And what I was noticing when we would talk about and tune into the spirit during these ceremonies, it was like this was about 10, 12 years ago. There was always this idea that, oh, everything's in a council. And then as I started to learn with the grandmothers too, so like in the spirit realms of what we were working with, whether that was the bristlecone pine trees or the fairy realms, like, well, everything is a council. And to me, that's like means a circle, right? It's like a circle of being. And so in my shamanic work too, I would see, oh yeah, there's a council of dragons, there's a council of unicorns, there's a council of ancient tree people. There's like, and then also in the grandmother tradition, working with grandmother teachings and elder teachings, there was a real honoring and a lot of teachings. And I think in women's circles in general, there's tons of teachings about circling and how we are, no one is above anyone else. We are equals, we are sovereign, we are in that oneness, and the power is what we can bring into the center, you know, the wholeness, the collective. And of course, people facilitate and guide, and people play different roles in the circle. But I think in our world right now, moving from this patriarchal power over and male over and white over, you know, all these kind of distortions of power, there's a need to recognize and learn from nature that they operate in council. And so when I started working with land that I was living on, I think it really came in most in Mosier, Oregon. I was called to live there by a blue elf and work with a woman that owned the land. And so we started meeting, and it just came through like, oh, we're going to meet with the land council. Let's just call it that. And then when I moved in, I said, okay, let's have a land council meeting. And we sat and we did some shamanic journeying, we some drums, and we went inside and just asked for those, you know, beneficial, healed and whole, those beings that respect our sovereignty, you know, having good boundaries, but inviting those beings of this land, you know, the trees and the plants, the crystals and the rocks, the animals, and then all the invisible realms, right? The fairies, the unicorns, the indigenous ancestors, like really honoring all seen and seen realms of nature and the land. And so we just called forth this circle, and all sorts of beings came. It's like full, right? Because in any place you live, there's going to be, if you work that way and kind of animistically, right? You're going to have, and actually a lot of excitement from all these spirits that, wow, there's a human in our council, like a human wants to work with us. I think part of, right? But part of
it's about time.
Part of our responsibility, and I think the Fairy Congress, I've been going part of the Fairy Congress for many years, and it's been a big part of my growth process too, and learning and sharing that our responsibility as humans is to sit on our thrones in the council, in the land council with these other beings. I think that's the teaching of the Fairy Congress, to do that in our places on these lands, by the waters, wherever, and communicate and open and like, okay, I'm here, like, what is my role in the circle? What do you need help with? What can you help me with? What can we, open that reciprocity that way. But just to add a really interesting thing that we'd notice when we'd have these meetings, sometimes we do them on our own, sometimes we do them together, was that about half the time, the Land Council was gifting us with healing. And they just wanted us to lay down and receive the energy from the earth. So it's very interesting to notice. And I notice this a lot with water when I work with water too. So working with the Land Council isn't like, oh my God, hard work, you're always having to do things. But it's also like they're helping us humans relax and heal and tune in and receive, so we can be part of this, the circle, this Land Council, and communicate. And I feel like that is the true power. Like, I know we're all learning how to be more empowered as individuals and, be in your power and do your, purpose here. But I think it's important to remember, like, the most powerful people are those that have really strong relationships with spirit, right? And when you know how to work with spirit, you're very powerful. And they're the ones that can do the work that's needed for these difficult things, like the ghost clearing, the historical imprints, all that.
So I'm kind of curious here. This is fascinating topic. Thank you. But let's say somebody calls you up and they have a, property, land. It can either be urban, it can be in the city, or it can be out in the country, and something just doesn't feel right. And I'm assuming there are helping spirits that you work with. Because if you go to a land that is kind of wonky, like something's not right, something's not healthy, and do you call forth the land council of that property?
Well,
And
yeah,
so
I think,
because you might be working with spirits that aren't very healthy, or they're entrapped, or
yeah, exactly.
How does that
Well,
work?
part
Or
of it
can
is
you,
the boundary, right? Like, if you're going to land, I will work with that, but I also will set boundaries, and I will also bring my own, I call it my entourage, like bring my own process. Like, it's important to be personally aligned, do your spiritual hygiene, have yourself grounded, and all those, and then call upon my own guides and counsel, I guess you could say, even that I have my own counsel that I work with that comes with me.
okay.
So I think that's really important. And so then, when you go on land, then you're kind of like, okay, like, you're not just working on your own, you're working on with other spirits in order to connect with the Land Council. Because sometimes they need help. They often do, and that's why I'm called in. But I think you can find out a lot by, like, going to the land, bringing your counsel with you, and then talking or having some kind of way you can communicate with, the beings on that land. Okay, who's there? Who needs help? Who wants to talk? There's kind of the layers, and you can find out a lot of things. Kind of like an example of that. I was working with someone, and I think it was one of my students, and there was sort of interesting energy. She was working a lot with the land council outside, and then we were tuning into the house deva, the spirit of the house. And there's almost like the house spirit was like, I want you to work with me. You're outside working with all the spirits out there. Like, don't forget about me. And what ended up happening was we were called to work with her. She kind of came across that way. And at first she was like really lonely for the people that used to live there and really confused about where they went and why weren't they there anymore. So we did some communication with her but she still couldn't like get it. And so we ended up doing like calling in the land council and supporting, with this house deva as the primary one we were working with, and then working with her to tune into what happened with the land in the past. And then end up, there was a lot of historical imprints, and even way back to the indigenous ancestors. So it ended up being through the house deva, like all the layers back through time, to connect with and recognize and go, okay, we're just going to be present. A lot of it's just being present, facilitating, opening what communication wants to happen, grounding that. And then we were able to kind of see some of the, trauma that she held. And then I even used some essence. I'm trying to remember one of the flower essences I used to help her kind of start to unwind, because I've noticed this with certain devas and spirits. They get covered over. They're kind of like with humans, right? If they've had trauma, sort of crazy, but these devas and spirits get covered, right? So this helps that energy. It's like the energy of the house that she is animating, right? So we helped unwind all that. And then all of a sudden it was like, whoa, like it gets to a point where energy just opens like that. It's almost like an ancestor healing for the house deva and that. And then ultimately it affects the whole land, because all of a sudden she was like, oh my gosh, like she was shining again, and she could think, or whatever they do, communicate clearly. And she was happy with who's there, happy with the woman I was working with. And so it was a really fascinating, like, who calls, And I've had other ones where we were working with a lot of the elementals, and then all of a sudden all the indigenous ancestors of the land come in. And in one case, we were working with someone looking for their place. And so we tuned into some trees and some dragons and the gnomes and different kind of levels that were welcoming her to find her new house. And then we were seeing the Native American spirits sitting on the earth, but facing outward, kind of like protectively, because they were welcoming her family. And then she found that house. She ended up moving there with her family. So I think it's recognizing all these relationships, and I think the council makes it a little simpler, instead of, who to work with. And even in my book, like, there's so many different, spirits, and to work with, it can be a little overwhelming. That if you work in that council and go, okay, what's the, even if there's a gatekeeper or someone who's wants to be the speaker of it or needs the most attention,
Because a lot of times in, people who are teaching shamanic techniques, there's an emphasis, and rightly so, on developing good relationships with your helping spirits. So let's say you work with a Sasquatch, you develop a good relationship. But I've never, I mean, I've heard of people working kind of with an entourage. I mean, you end up working with an entourage, but you're the first one who's really, or that I know of, that has really called it a land council. Um, but I mean, that's a lot of voices there. Do you usually have like one person who's like the speaker, the
Yeah.
representative of the land council? And
Yeah.
is that
And
the
just the,
deva of the property, or is it like the local
yeah.
gnome, or?
Yeah. I can share a little about when I moved into the place of Mosier, how that worked, but also to recognize that, like, if let's say you have unicorn in your council or a few, like they're
Mm-hmm.
kind of representatives for for the unicorn kingdom or realms. So in a sense, you're hearing the voices from the different beings um, are coming in to have that conference, the council. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
there's circles upon circles upon circles, right? Like we have our own circle, and then you're on land, and there's the beings in that circle, and then each of those beings has their circles. And so yeah, it kind of connects in with the universe and the oneness of all. But when I started working with them, with the idea of the council, like the first thing that we did was work with the overlighting deva of the land. Because that to me feels like sort of the angel, the spirit, the devic, right? It's sort of in between
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
divine realms and the nature realms. And so it's like, okay, overseeing this land in that oneness way. And so I was seeing her, I think kind of like gold and blue and whites and very angelic. And that's my experience. I mean, people are different how they experience these energies, but for me, it was very loving, very much the oneness, the kind of Christ Sophia consciousness, unity consciousness. And so that felt like the overlighting realm of land. And remember, well, I was on like I think it was 5 acres. But if you're like in a neighborhood, there might be an overlighting deva that covers the whole neighborhood, just to let people know that. But so I was just feeling a lot of love, oneness. She felt good, happy. I mean, sometimes you tune into them and they have stuff going on and they need support. But she felt like guiding us in the oneness, like this was meant to be a sanctuary for fairies, nature spirits, wildlife, plants, with us humans facilitating that process. Like we were guided that way, kind of like Fintorn in a way, right? Working with these spirits. And so, so this Deva kind of gave us that sort of blueprint, overriding blueprint of love and oneness. And that was the intention. And then when we started to call in the council, it did feel like, oh, there's gnomes here. There's definitely a lot of tree spirits. There's rocks and crystals. The wind, like it would get upset if we didn't call in the wind when we did ceremony. And it would like pick up and get windier and like blow down branches. We were doing this big ceremony one time, and for the land and the earth and the waters. And so both of us had different ways we did ceremony, but we were doing a big one that day with a group. And yeah, the wind came in and was like blowing things down. So we're like, oh yeah, the wind spirit, it's really important to call in. So I think it's like us humans, we all really want to be acknowledged, recognized, seen, heard, loved, right? Appreciated. And if people recognize that that's the same for the fairies and the trees and the rocks and the and everything in creation, when you share that love and appreciation. So anyway, yeah, so we were doing that with the gnomes and then the unicorns came in, white horses. It felt like there's a whole herd of white horses moving through, and then unicorns. Seeing, let's see, what else? The ancestors, yes, is very strong in Mosier. It's out in the Columbia River Gorge for the Warm Springs and the Chinook, Yakima, YM, Salilo, like lots of different tribes. That energy was really important to work with them. So it was just like an opportunity to gather with all the different spirits there and acknowledge and say, you know, this is what we've been told. I think it's also a reminder for people, like when you move to a place or you're buying land or you're caring for it, when you tune into the land council, you can find out, like, what is this land about? What is the purpose? What's been going on through history? Like, what does it want to express? I think we're so human centric, right? We like, I'm going to buy a land so I can do my breathwork ceremony here in the woods. Da, da, da. It's like, you know, you're just buying a stage to do your human thing. And I know a lot of people are guided, and that's happening more and more, but I think it's important to like get over, the human centric orientation of our world and kind of step back, open that relationship and see. And so we were able to, those first meetings were a lot about how do we set up a container that just keeps the integrity of the sacredness of this land, and not have, you know, people come in, they bring their stuff with them, or, you know, neighbor stuff, whatever, disruptive, distorted energy. So like, how do you hold, you know, sacred space for the land? So that was kind of interesting first, like working with them. And so there was a lot of like enthusiasm and like, oh, we'll do this and we'll do that. And we'll set up a place at the entrance. And so it was interesting. A lot of I think it was the unicorns were like really into like wanting to help with the protection and circle the land and the horses and keep that energetic going. But then when it came to being like at the entrance of the land, when we were checking in later, we realized they need to move. Like, we need the gnomes. The gnomes came in later and they're like, oh, we'll do the stuff where at the entrance where people drive in, and create, like, they can be more still. And they also guided us like to put up a mirror, which kind of bounces off any energies that's not really supportive. We were told to put up, we had a dream catcher that we put up by the road. And then we put some crystals on either side. So there's sort of like some ideas that they gave for this intention and to help work with the land.
Wow, this is fascinating. I'm curious, do you ever have to intermediate between two different kinds of nature spirits who, first of all, might not be aware of each other, and I've got a story to tell there.
Yeah.
And you've got the nature spirits who were connected with the people who lived here originally, and then you have the nature spirits, you know, the brownies and the elves that came over with the immigrants. Is there a, do you have to intermediate between those two? Like, is there suddenly like an ancestral spirit, nature spirit who's like, what are you doing on my land?
I think that's kind of the point of the land council. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's a peacekeeping circle. And so I think inherently what you're saying, I'd love to hear your story too. Can you share your story about that? Because I think this is really part of why, like, as a human, I'm guided to share this, right? Because I think that's what we're doing, is creating sort of communication. Well, yeah, communication between these spirits as well, because that has come up. I'm not like, I want to hear your story because I'm not getting an example this minute.
What it's interesting, and I'd like to come back to how the Fairy and Human Relations Congress has inspired you work. But so the Fairy Congress is a gathering. Now it's online in January, but it's in person in July. And I remember once at a Fairy Congress, we were doing some kind of shamanic work, and I was very aware that I had a Sasquatch and I had a she being, and they had not met each other. And as a human, and it was so kind of like, it was such a like a little, like when you encounter these things, and it's like, wow, this is the power of being human. I'm part of the Fairy Congress, and there is a she being and a Sasquatch that have not met. They've been in kind of all parallel universes, but they haven't really crossed paths. And I got to introduce them to each other. And it was such a I mean, like, am I making this up? Am I going insane? But it was such a beautiful one. And I kind of, remember, okay, Lord of the Rings. That was a book that everybody's read. It really got imprinted in our psyche. But in the Fellowship of the Ring, you had the elves and the dwarves did not get along. And in some way, it was kind of this fellowship that got to bring them together. I mean, I'm kind of simplifying a long story. So here was, okay, the she and the Sasquatch had not met. And it was such a, and I'm also curious that there are nature spirits who are attached to, or are really, God, what's the word here? Attached to the Aboriginal people who lived here. And then there are fairies and nature spirits who move around. So when the immigrants came over, they came with them. And that must have been a really interesting, you've got nature spirits who have been here forever, and then you get a new group that come in. How do they, yeah.
Yeah.
How,
I
and yeah, go
remember
on.
years ago at
This
I
is
love that story
fascinating.
so much. When RJ Stewart came and did ceremony and brought fairies from the East Coast to the West
Yes,
Coast,
good example.
and I was playing my wooden flute then, and I remember one of the fairies came into my flute and now was in my flute. But I remember there was kind of a
Good
undercurrent
example.
later, right? Of like, wait, these are really different. These are East Coast fairies, elementals that are coming like to this beautiful land at Scalitude. But like, how could that integration happen? And I know, talking to Lindsay, there was some things, and I don't really have the whole story of all that. It'd be interesting to talk about that more. But for me, I think I'm such a peacekeeper that I don't always get into the nitty gritty. But just to, I guess, an example that I could think of was when I was working with the mermaids down on the Hood River. And that's when I met Britta and started to work more with the mermaids and really have conversations and get to know her more and do more work with the water. And it's something I did work with the Fairy Congress too. And then I was going through the woods in that right next to the river another day, and I was hearing this like this voice clearing. I'm like, okay, somebody's here. And then it was like a couple gnomes, like these beefy, pretty tall gnomes, the ones that communicate with humans. And they're like, we want to talk to you, Camilla, and I'm like, oh, okay. And they were like, well, we notice you're talking to Britta, the mermaids, and we want you to talk to us too. And also they were saying, like, we know you're going to write about Britta and the mermaids. And I did end up writing a book and sharing more about mermaids, because I kind of, went through that phase of work. Well, I do work a lot with the water, but I could see, like, in this interaction that these gnomes were it was almost cute, like a little sibling rivalry in a way. But I think it's more like these beings are, and the ones that connect with us are like tasked with, we got to get with the humans. We got to like help educate other humans through the ones like us that are tuned in. Like, I think that's a really important role right now, right? And so they were like, oh, please, we really want you to write about us. So the gnomes, like, of course they're in my book, but there's so much more. Like, they've given me long, like, poems. So there was, like, between those. But it was also interesting to notice, like, traveling with Marshall, because he's indigenous too. He's indigenous elder from the Paiute Washoe tribe. And so even going through some of his homelands and working with the different spirits, me more with the elementals and nature spirits. I mean, definitely ancestors too, but he works a lot with the grandmothers and his own ancestors through, thousands of years. And also he, tunes into the little people and the gnomes and loves them, and the fairies, like, he really appreciates them. And so it was fun to kind of see, like, where does that cross, because some of that on the land, like, if there is any conflict, it's like we can heal that through human peacekeeping and relationship, right? So I guess most of that has been approached that way.
Yeah, so just for the viewers, so Fairy Congress used to be held at a place called Scalitude, which was 160 acres surrounded by national forest on all sides. So there was a lot of Sasquatch and a lot of this was kind of in northeast Washington. And R.J. Stewart, who was one of the foremost experts, I'm not quite sure, authors on the Scottish underworld, Celtic underworld tradition. He had been on the East Coast, he had been on this land, and there was like some major development going on, and he was moving over to the West Coast, and there was a group of fairies that say, hey, we want to come with you, we want to go to Scalitude. And so he put him in his flute, and he's this amazing musician. He used to play with the chieftains, and so he's shows up at Fairy Congress, and we do a little ritual where he plays his flute, and these fairies come out to the land. And so I do remember there was a little kind of hubbub about, the nature spirits who were there, who had been there forever or a long time, and the new ones from the East Coast, and having to do that diplomacy. So that was like, thank you for reminding me of that one. And I also want to say, just before I forget it, Marshall Golden Eagle Jack will also be presenting at the Gaian Congress about Bigfoot. So he's coming from the Paiute Washoe tribe, and he's going to be sharing some of the Bigfoot stories, songs, etc. So that's exciting. I just find this really fascinating.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah,
go
for
like
it.
I think for me and a lot of this work, like, I think that's such a fascinating thing. I'm totally fascinated with what you're talking about, like the new fairies, the fairies that have been here, how that integration on those worlds go. But I think what I've noticed is so much of the work I've been called to is to support the healing and presence for the indigenous ancestors themselves. That feels like such a huge, and I think this year it's going to be really big too, Like I've had so many incredibly profound experiences of tuning to land and honoring the tribes from that place. And a lot of times these spirits of these tribes will come in and do ceremony with the land council and myself in the spirit realm to sing their songs, to beat their drums, to do their ceremony, and to be seen and acknowledged and amends made and whatever healing we can bring in our way. And a lot of times they're ready to leave, like to move on from that. But I guess that's kind of been such a huge focus for years that I think that almost needs to happen. Yeah, it's been maybe a priority over the spirits they work with that way. Yeah. So anyway.
Wow, that's a lot. You're covering a lot, and I really commend you for doing this work and for pulling it together. It's a lot. I'm kind of curious how, so in your book, and I was kind of tickled because like on page 5, you start talking about the Fairy Congress, like the Fairy Congress kind of comes in really quickly. How, I'm really curious, like you've been involved for years. I think you first came in like 20 years ago, and we've kind of developed. I've been there for 20 years. How, when you look back, what's the importance of the Fairy Congress and how did it inspire you?
Yeah, it's I think the biggest piece is it's kin, it's relationships with beautiful souls that are doing this work as well, right? We find each other there, we create family.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of my amazing relationships have been through that, or encouraged other people to come to be part of that. And I think it's also like a place to connect with a lot of amazing teachers, learn, just being in that energy. Like sometimes for me, I tend to be I am very energetically sensitive and empathic. And sometimes I couldn't even go to all the very many classes at it or workshops, but just being there, I felt like I was absorbing all this wisdom and sort of like energy, learning, how to deal with challenges. Even I noticed in the early days, we were like trying to figure stuff out, and there'd be some, weird energies around, like, okay, like, what do we do with this? And just like building trust and relationship, trust in my own seership, my own mediumship, my gifts and abilities.
Yeah.
And I think going there has really been helpful. And even like stepping in, I stepped in pretty early as a teacher. I tend to like do that. Like, even if I don't know a lot, I'm like, I want to learn this, I'll teach it, and it's great because it's like, we all learn from each other anyway. So stepping in and, sharing things about mermaids and flower essences and trees and just being with groups, you just learn so much in that council, right? Like we were always in different circles with each other and having fun, like stepping out of, I'm always enjoy that energy of just really stepping into a different realm outside. You're camping, having fun, getting out of your, being in the house by yourself or whatever, your other world, in your own mind. So yeah, I just think it's an amazing experience. And I love seeing the new people. Like last year, we had a number of new people coming in now that we're close to Portland. And yeah, so I think a lot of inspiration and yeah, just part of that family. And I think this book, and I did make a card deck too to go with it, that a lot of this work, is the magic of it comes through like all of our relationships. You know, I'm just sort of letting this energy move through me to create all this because it's fun for me. But I think part of, right? And part of that gift of the Fairy Congress and meeting all these people is, I think we're here just to support the upliftment and the empowerment and the magic for everyone. So everyone just starts to like bring that out and express it. And I can see that like after 20 years, like there's lots of people have books and they're doing amazing things, and all the different people that have come over the years. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'll put all the links in the comment section or in the I'll upload this as a YouTube. Yeah, Camilla, I think it's really exciting seeing you blossom. What's your last name?
Why I picked my name.
But you know, thank you again. The land council. That's like a new. You've identified something new, and you're bringing that forward into our consciousness, and I think that's really important because we are working with the wind and the land and you also said something really important in your book, like it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Like we're relearning our relationship with the earth. You phrased it really well. I'm kind of butchering it a little bit, but we're learning how to be with the earth in a different way.
And I get what you're saying, that it's new and no one's talked about it, and that may be true, but it's really very ancient, right? So I think for me, like I'm always working with the grandmothers and the origins and the ancient energies of the elementals and such, as well as the new way we're evolving and, you know, ascending and those new energies. So I think there's such a blending. So I guess just to maybe think about that these councils are as ancient as the earth, right? There's probably those of us in the council that created this planet, or right, or the ancient grandmothers of creation. There are 13 grandmothers. You know, that's why that whole 13 grandmother energy, right? Because they always worked in council. So I think we're learning, right? We're learning how to sit in council together, even as in human councils and human circles, and then how to sit in council with invisible realm beings. So pretty exciting, or like the Bigfoot council,
that's exciting, right? That's okay. Let's start it. Let's go on a new course here. We're shifting gears. We're doing something that's ancient. It's so exciting that you know herbalism and permaculture and shamanism and the council work. These are like old ways of being that we're researching and that are coming back because the old ways are not working. So
they're not. It's not, they're not non-hierarchical, right?
This is not fun. This is not working. We got to shift a lot of stuff here. Yeah.
And the hierarchy thing, I think from day one on this planet, I didn't really get the hierarchy so much. You know, how much it's set up in this way.
Yeah, it's systemic.
Yeah. And so I think the circling, and I think, like listening, it's about listening to each other, right? Like not just other humans, but listening to the land, listening to the fairies. What do they need? Listening to the hummingbirds, the tree.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, Camilla, thank you.
You're
This has been
welcome.
so if people want to study with you, like I would be really excited, like, oh my God, nobody else is teaching this stuff or teaching land clearing or ghost busting or something, but you're teaching something
Right.
different.
Mhm.
I know, isn't that funny? Ghost busting is such a, yeah, you're teaching something different. How do people, so you got your website.
Yeah.
Can you say anything
Well, I
about your
do.
teaching
Yeah, I'm
courses or?
in the middle of a my Gateway to Gaia land alchemy training with a group um, with our council. And so that's going on now, and a new one will start in September. And it's kind of two parts. The first part, actually, the book is the manual. So we do a lot about relationship, working with all these things we're talking about. And then the second part, I go through, like, I came up with like 22 practices that are, sometimes it's overwhelming to do land work. It's really big work. There's a lot, like we were talking about, all the things. And so having a way to like narrow it down, like what does your land need? You know, what does every land need? How do we gather the land council and listen? What are the things the land are asking for? Does it need historical imprint clearing? Does it need work with, you know, ghosts, unsettled spirits, discarnate energies? Does it need elemental balancing? Does it need playfulness and work with the fairies and the gardens? So we kind of, I'm going to be doing that with a group as part two. So that's sort of my bigger course. I'm also this month doing like fun fairy tea parties at my house in Vancouver, Washington. So kind of get involved in that meeting and ceremony, and then I do a Patreon group where we're kind of working more the bigger picture, like the visioning for Gaia, New Earth, visioning the new Earth. And that's a Patreon community that meets a couple times on Zoom a month. And it's really fun. It's a nice community, and we kind of co-create together to work on in places or the Earth as a whole with the different beings, elementals, fairies, all the different beings. And I do mentorship, private mentorship. And I think there'll be more coming. So probably the best is like get on my newsletter list from my website, which is on my with my name, camillablossom.com. And when you're on that, I kind of tell, you know, let people know. But also just reading the book. I mean, there's like tons of why I wrote it. I also have a flower essence book, mermaid book. Like reading the book gives a lot of the background, and also there's a lot of rituals in there. So simple things like, you know, going out on your land and giving offerings on each direction and seeing who's there. What are the energies? What do they want as an offering? You know, so some of those really core teachings are really important. Yeah.
Camilla, thank you. I'm so excited. And I feel like I'm getting more of the big picture of who you are and the importance of the work you're doing.
Thank you.
I didn't really, I mean, there's so many of us who are doing really interesting work,
Yeah.
but I was like, oh, wow, this is really important. Thank you for doing this work. So I will put all the links in the comment section or in the description. Thank you, Camilla. We will see
Thank you,
you
Jan.
in 3 weeks, January 20th, with the Gaian Congress.org. And then we'll probably see you at the Fairy Congress. I think it's the third weekend of July, right? And that'll be an in-person right east of Salem in the Old Growth Canyon. Yay.
Yeah,
Any
thank you so
last,
much,
any, you're welcome. It's
Jan.
always fun to chat
Yay,
with you.
I
I look forward
know.
to doing
It's
this again.
lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I just guess to encourage everyone to form relationship with the unseen realms. Appreciate them, love them, and just as you would each other, right?
Yeah. You know, I have to. I got my bachelor's degree in international relations and diplomacy. And I was always like, doing these other things. Like, I'm not putting my bachelor's, my education to use.
Oh my God, you
Well, I
totally
guess, I mean,
are.
I am. I totally am. I totally am.
And
Cultural
okay,
interactions.
but also we've been having international fairies from other countries.
Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Annie was talking about inviting when she was in Italy, Annie Clark inviting some of the Italian fairies to come. And they didn't know about it. So like there's an international thing going on there now.
Yeah, and there's a lot. That's why it was so tickling when um it's so tickling. It was so fun when I encountered a Sasquatch and a she being who had not like crossed paths before. There's a lot. It's not just
Yeah.
humans meeting, learning how to work with nature spirits. It's nature spirits working with them and working with like, okay, how do we work
Yeah.
when we've got severe climate change? How do we've got to shift gears, and how do we do that? So there's a lot of, you can feel the wheels turning. Like
Yeah.
we're thinking in new ways.
Yeah. There's really big. And it's also like that healing between all the traditions and,
Yeah.
things that are really surfacing now with hate. It's like we're creating a amends, blending. Maybe that's part of it, like you say, the
I hope
she
so.
and Sasquatch, or the different beings of different traditions connecting, as well as the people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Any last things you want to share with us?
I'm just grateful for you too, and all the beautiful work and that you share in the world as well. So I'll end with
Thank
that
you. Thank
gratitude for
you.
you and all you do for the Fairy Congress too, for bringing forward this really important events, and helping spread that magic and remembering. Yeah.
At your
Back at
service. Yeah,
you.
back at you. Okay.
All
See
right.
you
Thank you.
January 20th. All right.
Okay.
Bye.